Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to Programming Knowledge. And in today's lecture, we're going to talk about how to create user registration form using pure PHP. And in this course, we'll learn how to create this particular registration. So we have the first name, last name, email address, and phone number, and of course the last one, password. So the technologies that we're going to use are the following: PHP, MySQL. We're gonna use the Bootstrap for the front end of our user registration form, and of course we're gonna use the jQuery. So let's go ahead and create our new project. Let us navigate to our local host directory and create a new directory that will hold all the files necessary for our project. So new folder, and let's name it user accounts. And then inside this particular folder, we're going to define few files for our project. So let's define the index.php. Okay, chains extension, yes. And also let's define config.php, and also another one for our registration form. So registration.php. So these files will be vital for our project. Config is for the configuration for our database connection. The index.php will be displaying all the users registered, and of course again the registration.php, where in which our form or user registration form will be displayed or located. So now that we have the basic structure of our project, let's go ahead and edit registration.php to create our user registration form. Okay, so now open up the registration.php and we have an empty file. So all we have to do is define the HTML structure for this one. So HTML, and if you're using Sublime Text, you can just type in HTML and press tab in your keyboard. Okay, so the title for this one is user registration in PHP. So for now, let's define our user registration form. So we're just gonna define a very basic user registration form, and later on we'll improve the front end by using the Bootstrap library. So let's start with a div, and inside this div, let's define a form. And of course, inside this form, we could define a div for our container. And let's not forget to set the action for our form, which is action. And for now, let's use the registration.php. And the method, let's use post method. So under the container div, let's define h1, and it should say registration. Okay, and a paragraph that says fill up the form with correct values. Okay, after that one, let's define an input with the input keyword with the type text. And for the name, let's name it as first name. And of course, let's define the label for this one. So label for first name, so it should be bold with the keyword first name. And of course, this first name should be required. After that, we could just copy and paste this lines. So label for first name and input text with the type or with the name first name. So let's paste one for our last name, for our email address, for our phone number, and for our password. Okay, so let's change this into last name, this to last name, and of course the name should be last name also. This one is for email address, so email and email for the name or for the name of the input, and phone phone number, and also the label for the phone number. Lastly is the password. So password and password for the name and label for the password. So let's change this input type into, of course, we're using the password, and of course we're using email for this field for email address. So if we're done with that, let's check our registration.php file in our browser. So go on with our browser and type in localhost and user accounts, which is for our project name. So user accounts and registration.php. So we have here a very basic form or user registration form, and we can see that we're missing a button for our submit. So let's define it in our registration.php file. So input and then type submit, and for the name is, so for example, create. Okay, so the value for this one is sign up. So save your file and let's go back to our browser and refresh our registration.php page. So as you can see, we have now the sign up button. And the next step for this one is to actually implement PHP for this user creation or user registration form. So let's go back to our code. And above this div, let's create a new div and let's open up our PHP tag inside this particular div. And of course, the first thing we're gonna need is to check if the users submitted the form. All we have to do is type in the keyword is set, and with the keyword post, and of course we're gonna need the name of the name of our submit button, which is create, and open curly brace and close curly brace. So for now, let's just check if the submit button is working. Let's type in echo user submitted for us to check if the submit button is working. So let's go back to our browser and refresh our page. Let us see if the sign up button is working. Okay, we forgot that we defined the first name as required, also with this one, and so on. So for now, let's define values for this: first name, last name, sample values, and password. And for email address, of course, we need to set a valid email address and click on the sign up button. So as you can see, user submitted is displayed, meaning our sign up button or sign up submit button is working. So we have already implemented the form of or the basic form of our user registration. So as promised in the first video, we will continue working on with the implementation of the PHP code behind user registration. So before doing that, we need to step back and reflect on our design of the user registration page. So as you can see, we have the very basic looks of our user registration page, and we want to improve this. So in order for us to improve the looks of this registration page, we need the powers of the Bootstrap library. So all we have to do now is download the components or the CSS files or the JS files included in the Bootstrap. So let's go ahead and type in Google and Bootstrap. So we have here the first link to Bootstrap site. So let's just click on this and click on this download button. So we have few options here. We could just include the compiled CSS and JS into our files. We could download the source files. We could actually use the CDN of our Bootstrap. But for the purpose of this tutorial, we'll be using or we'll be downloading the files directly or this compiled CSS and JS. So download and then save, force. Okay, so once the file has been downloaded, we just need to locate the files in our system and include the necessary files such as the CSS and the JS files into our project. So I have here the downloaded file, which is Bootstrap. In my case, this is version 4.3.1. So all we need is to extract the file and copy the CSS and GS file or GS files inside this Bootstrap dist folder and paste the CSS and GS files into the project that we have created earlier, and make sure it is located side by side with our defined files, which is the config index.php and registration.php. Okay, so once we have that, we just need to open up our registration.php to actually include the CSS files from Bootstrap. So open up registration.php, and inside the head tag of our HTML, let's include the CSS coming from the CSS folder here in our project. Okay, so link with a type of text or CSS, and then for the reference we need to uh, type in CSS slash, and we're going to use the minified version of the Bootstrap CSS. So let's just use this bootstrap.min.css. So bootstrap.min.css. Okay, and let's try to reload our page. Before that, make sure that you have saved the registration.php, and let's go to our browser and refresh our page. So as you can see, we know that the CSS is working because the layout of our page changed, which corresponds to the styles that have been set in the CSS file. So we just need to add few classes to the markup for this inputs. So the inputs for first name, last name, and also we want to change we want to add some classes to the sign up button so it would look like a professional button. So all we have to do now is go back to our PHP or registration.php code, and inside this div with the class container, let's define a new div which has a class of row. So div, then row, and make sure that we close this div to this point. Okay. Next, let's create a new column which also uses the markup div, and make sure that we close this div right here. So let's indent our code so it would be readable. Okay, so let's add a class to this division, which is class call sm3. So this class is specific for Bootstrap. So if you want to know more about Bootstrap, you can browse to their documentation and study the different columns configuration or the grid configuration of Bootstrap. So let us continue. Let's add a class to this input, which is form control, and let us just copy this one. So paste this to other inputs, last name, email, uh, phone number, and also with the password. And save the registration.php and try to preview our page. Open up the browser and reload the page or registration page. So as you can see, the layout and the looks of our registration form is much better than what we have previously. But we're not done yet with our styling. Perhaps we need to add a space here between the first name and the fill up form with the correct values, and also with our button and the last input for password. And of course we want to add the class for our button. So let's go back to our registration.php. So after the paragraph fill up the form with correct values, let's add a horizontal rule for this, and with the class mb-3. Okay, and let's just copy this one for this space between password and the button. Save the file and open up the browser, refresh. So we have here the spaces between first name and fill up, and of course the password and sign up. And last but not the least is for the sign up button. So go back to our registration.php again and add class to this button, which is class btn, and let's set this btn into primary. Save registration.php and go back to browser and refresh. There you have it. It's not a word class form per se, but it is much better than what we have before. So I think that's it for our styling, and let's go back to our PHP code and implement the logic for our user registration. Okay, so previously we have started the logic, which is to check if the post create is set and echo that the user has submitted the form. So now let's get the values coming from this form, which is so for example the first name, and using the post variable and supply the first name, which is the name of our input field, and of course we want to use this to implement other fields, which is this one for our last name and email, phone number, and also the password. Okay, let's make our code readable by indenting it in one line. Okay, so we have all the necessary fields or the fields coming from our form. So now let's try to display all the values once the user has submitted the form. So echo first name and then the last name. Let's just copy the first one. Email, phone number, and password. So last name or email and then phone number and password. Okay, and of course semicolon at the end of the line. Save our registration.php and go back to our browser. Refresh, and let's try to put some values here. For our email, test@test.com. Phone number doesn't matter for now, and password, and click on sign up. Okay, so we have here the values, and it has successfully displayed the values coming from this form. So in the previous tutorial, we have styled our user registration form. So as you can see, we have improved the looks of our form, and we also modified our PHP code to capture the values if the user submitted the form. So in this lecture, we're going to implement the database connection, and we will create a new database that will hold all the information of the user accounts. So let's go ahead and open up our browser. Let's try to use the localhost phpMyAdmin. Okay, click on the new link, and for the database name, type in user accounts and click on create. Let's create a new table with the name users, and for the number of columns we have, I think, 6. One column for the ID, which is auto increment, the first name, the last name, the email, the phone number, and the last is the password. So 6, and click on go. So for this one, the first column is ID, and type in with auto increment option should be enabled. The second one is first name with a type of varchar, and the length, let's say 100, and the next one is last name, type varchar, and 100, and I think it's email, and let's set it also to varchar, and the next one is the phone number, should be varchar also, with the length of 50, and the password varchar, I think 32 will be enough, but let's just put it to 50 or set it to 50 and click on save. So now we have our database, which is the user accounts, and with the table users with 6 fields, which is ID, first name, last name, email, phone number, and password. I think it's high time for us to define or create our config.php. So let's open up our config.php file and connect our database to our PHP code. So here inside our config.php file, we need to open our PHP tag and define 3 variables, which is for our DB user, which is root, and DB password or DB pass. In my case, it's empty, and DB name equals course user accounts. Okay, so based on these variables, we need to define a new object of the PDO class, open close parenthesis. So inside here we need to type in MySQL and colon and then host equals localhost and semicolon. After that, db name equals, we need to append the db name variable that we have defined above and append another string which is for the character set of our database, which is UTF-8. And after that, we need to pass in the DB user variable and also the DB password variable or the DB pass variable. And let us set an attribute to this DB object below. So DB set attribute and open close parenthesis and PDO ATTR error mode or error mode and PDO error mode should be exception. So this will give us more information if we encounter problems when we're using the DB object later on. So with that, we're now ready to use this DB object into our registration.php. So open up the registration.php file and let's include the config.php into this file. So require once the config.php. Okay, and make sure that you save the config.php file. So inside this if statement, we can now use the DB object that we defined in config.php. So all we have to do now is type in the SQL. And of course, our first SQL will be insert into users. And we just need to list the fields, which are first name, last name, the email, the phone number, and of course the password with values open close and question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark 1 2 3 4. I think it's 5, right? 5. And statement for our insert, stmt insert equals the db object that we have defined in config.php and prepare, of course, supply the SQL statement. And let's just delete this line. So after this stmt insert, let's define result and stmt insert and type in execute. And of course, we need to supply the array of the fields or the values coming from the form, which is the first name, last name, email, and phone number and password. So if result is true, open close curly braces, echo successfully saved. Okay, else echo there were errors while saving the data. Save your file and open up the browser. Refresh the page and let's try to input some names here. Example, Jane, the last name Doe, and email address will be janedoe@gmail.com. Phone number plus 6239856, just random numbers. Okay, and password Jane Doe, and click on the sign up button. Cool. Now it says successfully saved. But let's check our database or the PHP to see if the data has gone through. Okay, so browse. Let's just click on this browse and you can see we now have the first record, which is the Jane, the first name Jane, last name Doe, email address janedoe@gmail.com, phone number, and of course the password, which is Jane Doe. Okay, so I think our insert method or insert logic is good, but there's a lot of room for improvement. So for example, we want the form not to reload every time we submit the information, and also the feedback, if successful or not, is, I think it's not that good or not that good looking. So we will implement the sweet alert library to replace this boring feedback that we have here. So in the previous tutorial, we have learned how to implement or insert values coming from this form into database. And in this tutorial, we're going to learn how to implement jQuery and the sweet alert to replace our traditional feedback. So as you can see, if you try to implement or if you try to click on or type in different values here, so email at test.com, phone number, password, and then click on sign up. So we have the traditional feedback here, successfully saved, which is I think not that intuitive. So we're going to implement the sweet alert to replace this traditional feedback. And instead of inserting the values to database using pure PHP, we're going to use the power of jQuery to help us insert values to the database without reloading the page. Okay, so first thing we're gonna need is to uh, search for the jQuery library. Okay, so we could click on or either on these links, but let's try this, the first link, jQuery, and click on the download. Okay, so here we could actually see all the options that we have for jQuery or for including the jQuery to our project. So accordingly, we can just use the CDN for our jQuery. But there are also option here to just use the CDN or other CDNs coming from some reputable companies such as the Google and Microsoft. So they're hosting also the jQuery. So for now, let's use this Google CDN. So open this by clicking on this link. Okay, so we could just copy this snippet for 3.x or for jQuery version 3 point something. So just copy the script and let's go back to our registration.php. And before the closing of the body tag, let's paste the script. And below this line, let's test our jQuery if it's working or not. So $sign and then function. open close parentheses and open close curly braces, semicolon at the end. And first, let's just alert something for the document ready event. So, hello. Save registration.php and go back to our browser, and let's go to our user accounts and registration.php. So we have the basic alert or JavaScript alert that says hello. So I think the jQuery library is working. So the next step will be to include another library, which is the Sweet Alert. So Sweet Alert will replace this uh, JavaScript alert pop-up. So let's search for Sweet Alert. Okay. So Sweet Alert. Actually, there are two versions: Sweet Alert and then the Sweet Alert 2, which is a newer version than the first one. So Sweet Alert 2 is a beautiful, responsive, customizable, accessible replacement for JavaScript pop-up boxes. So they have here a comparison between the normal alert and the Sweet Alert 2. So first, let's show the normal alert by clicking on this button. This is the native pop-up coming from the JavaScript. And the second one shows success message. So this is the Sweet Alert 2. So as you can see, this is much more better than the JavaScript native pop-up alert. So let's go ahead and integrate this Sweet Alert 2 to our project. So go to installation, and we just have to grab the CDN coming from the JS deliver. So all we have to do is copy this script or snippet, and we just have to paste it below the jQuery library that we have integrated earlier. Okay, and now instead of this alert, we need to call on the Sweet Alert 2, and then fire, and of course we need to define few things here, which are the title. Okay, title would be hello world, and text would be this is from Sweet Alert 2, and the type will be success. So let's try this. Go ahead, save our file, and go back to our browser and refresh our user registration or registration.php. Okay, so as you can see, we have here a better and much cleaner pop-up, which is coming from the Sweet Alert 2. So hello world, this is from Sweet Alert 2 library. Okay, now the next step is to include or to actually work on the jQuery, so it would help us to insert values coming from our form and insert it into the database. Let's go ahead and make some changes to our registration.php. So in our form, we have the submit button, which is the sign up, right? So instead, let's define an ID for this one, or let us say register. And inside here, let us type in ID register. If it's click, okay, this should be function, and close here. And inside this, let's try the sweet alert if it's working or not. So let's just check the sweet alert, or once we click the button, the submit button, the sweet alert should appear. Okay, so for now, save your file and go back to our browser and refresh our page. And let's try to click on this sign up button. Okay, so we have here the sweet alert. So it means that the script that we're working on is working. Okay, so before that, let's set this aside for now because our primary concern is the values coming from this form. Okay, so let's add some IDs to this field. So first name, let's just copy this. First name, last name, email, phone number, and password. So this will be last name, of course, email, and phone number, and this one is for password. So inside here at the function, we need to declare a variable for our first name. Okay, and then let's get the value by using the val method and specify our ID for first name. So copy and paste last name, email address, phone number, password. 1 2 3 4 5. So this will be for last name, and this is for email. Third one, the fourth one is for phone number, and of course for the password. Okay, let's indent this so it should be readable. Okay, okay. So at this point, we could actually perform a validation to these values, right? So first name, last name, email, phone number, password, and so on. But as you can remember, as you can probably remember, that we define a required attribute to our fields, so we can be sure that the values are not empty. But we could also check for validity of our values. So var is valid equals this dot form dot check validity. Okay, so we're just gonna check if the valid variable is true. If it's true, let's try to alert true, and else false. And we need to supply a parameter here, and inside the valid is true condition, we should prevent the form from submitting because we want to use the jQuery submit instead of the traditional submit of the form. So in the previous tutorial, we have already implemented the jQuery and Sweet Alert to our project. So this time we will continue working on with the jQuery so that it will post our data to the database or to a file, and then the file will be processing our information or processing the form data and insert it to the database. So we have here the prevent default that we have in the previous tutorial. So After this line, we need to define the AJAX request. Okay, so AJAX request and curly braces inside and semicolon at the end of this line. The next step is to define few things here. So the first one is type. So the type of this request is post, and for the URL we need to define process.php. So we'll be creating this file later on, process.php, and then data. So the data should be all the information, all the variables that we have defined here. So or better yet, we could change this or import or place this inside the condition valid, and then the data should be listed as follows: first name, then supply the first name, and let's just copy and paste this line 2 3 4 and 5, remove the last comma, and last name and email and phone number, and of course the password. And let's define another option, which is the success. So this success is a function that has the data parameter. Okay, and let's just copy this one for something if we encounter errors later on. Okay, the same thing, function, and it has data parameter. So we need to copy our speed alert pop up to display something here. So title should be successful, and the text user registered or successfully registered. Okay, and we could copy and paste this one for our error function. So errors, and there were errors while saving the data, and the type should be error, of course. Okay, so we have the first name, last name, okay, email, phone number, password, and the password value. Okay, let's just remove this, and so this line. Okay, so the next step is to create the process.php file. So let's define a new file, process.php, and inside this process.php, let's just echo something for now. Hello from process. So we'll know if the process.php is working or the AJAX request that we're working on is working. So save your file or process.php file, go back to our browser and refresh our page, and let's try to input something here. Okay, first name, last name, email address, phone number, and then sign up. Successfully registered. It says successfully registered. Okay, let's change the text. Instead of successfully registered, it should be the data coming from the process.php. Save your file registration.php and go back to the registration.php registration.php page, and refresh, input random email, okay, phone number, password, and then sign up. Hello from process, as you can see. So we can say that the process.php and the jQuery Ajax request is working. Okay, so the next step is to fully modify our process.php. So let's just copy the code that we have here earlier. Okay, and paste that into this process.php. And instead of checking if the post create is set, what we need is just to uh, check if the post is set. I mean, the post variable is set. So if that is set, then we could get all the values coming from the request. So first name, of course, last name, email, phone number, and password. Okay, and of course, if there's no request, let's just echo no data. And then we have here the insert for our database, right? But we don't have the connection for our database. So let's just copy the config require once line and paste it here in our process.php file. So we now have the config, all the configurations defined in config.php will be included here in our process.php file. So we have here all the values: first name, last name, email, phone number, and the password. So for the password, let's make it a little secure by using the SHA-1 encryption. So to encrypt our password, instead of a plain text password, the password will be saved as some random characters. So it will be less readable if someone got the access to our database. So let's save the process.php file, and of course also this registration.php, and go back to our browser and refresh our page. Okay, let's try first to sign up, or click the sign up button without filling in the form. Okay, so as you can see, the request will not be processed because there's a validation. And if we try to type in values here, say for example John Doe, and email is johndoe@gmail.com, number, okay, any random number for now, and password, any random password, and click on the sign up button, and it says successfully saved. And let's check our PHP if the information that we have submitted is saved into our database. So localhost and then PHP enter your password or username and password, go, and then user accounts, browse. See, in user accounts, we can see all the informations that we have submitted. So first name, last name, email, and of course the password that is hashed by SHA-1 encryption. Okay, so I think that's all there is to it on how to create user registration form in PHP. I hope you learned something in this tutorial. Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Programming Knowledge, and this is a video on how to create user login in PHP. And this is related to the previous video series on how to create user registration form. So in that tutorial we have discussed and learned how to create user registration form, and we define its database. So we're gonna be using the same database. So the database name is user accounts, and it has a table name users, and the users has ID, first name, last name, email, phone number, and password. So the ID is auto increment, and it has a size of 11. The first name is varchar or varchar with 100 as the length. Last name the same, length and the same type, email the same also. Phone number we have the varchar 50 as length, and password the same 50 as length. So as I've said, we're gonna be using the same database. So you can go ahead and create your own database with user accounts and then users table. Okay, and then all these attributes: ID, first name, last name, email, phone number, and password. So we'll be learning how to create this particular login page, and we're gonna be using the email and password for our login credentials, and I will be showing you all the steps so that we could get up and running with this login page. So for now, let's create our new project. So go to your localhost directory and create a new folder, and let's name it user login. Okay, so we'll be defining few things or few files here. So we have the first file will be login.php, and then the second one will be config.php, and we also have the uh, index.php, and also one for logout.php. Okay, and we'll be placing our images in img folder and css into css folder. So open up login.php and let's define the HTML structure for this one. So we have basic structure of our login.php, and for the title, let's say programming knowledge. Okay, we need to include Bootstrap, jQuery, and Font Awesome in our project because we're going to be using all those libraries to beautify our HTML structure. Because for now, if you try to visit our page, it's empty. So let's go back to our browser and search for the Bootstrap CDN, also jQuery CDN, and also Font Awesome. Okay, click on this first link for Bootstrap CDN. So you have different files that we have different files that can be included in our project. So we have the complete CSS. So click to copy, and let's go back to our login.php. So link, and of course paste the link that we have copied from the Bootstrap CDN page. Okay, and go back to our browser again. We need to include the Bootstrap minified.css. Click to copy and go back again to our login.php. We need to make sure to include this at the bottom or before the closing body tag. And then for the src, paste the code that we have from the Bootstrap CDN page. Again, let's go back to our browser and let's click on this jQuery CDN, and for now let's use this jQuery 3 point something version and click on this minified and copy this to clipboard and go back to our code and then uh, paste it above the bootstrap that uh, that JavaScript. Okay, so let's just make sure to properly format our code. And the next one will be the font awesome. Okay, click on the font awesome link, the first one, and then start using free. So we have here the link that we could include in our page. So just click on this button, okay, and go back to our code and make sure to uh, include this below the bootstrap main.css. Okay, and we need to define a container here. So div with a class container, and of course uh, another class for its height as 100%. This is specific for bootstrap styles, and another div with the class dflex with another class justify content center, and of course again the h100, and another div with the class of user underscore card, and another div flex again with justify content center class, div flex and then justify content center, and inside here will be the logo for our login page, as you can see in our sample page here. So we have here the logo. So we will define the logo inside this div. So that will be inside another div, which is with the class of brand underscore logo container, and we will define our image here for the logo, and let's add a class for our logo, which is brand logo, and alt text will be programming knowledge logo. Okay, and for our logo I have created a very artistic logo. I have summoned my creative abilities to create this very awesome logo for our login page. So you could create your own logo. Just make sure to make it circle so it will fit in our login form. So go ahead, copy and paste your logo into our img folder in our project. Okay. So make sure to paste this logo or your logo inside this img folder. And for the source of our image, let's type in img and of course the file name of our logo, which is for my case img/logo.png. And so let's create a new CSS file so that we could target this class and also this class, and we will define styles for this. So link, and for our reference it will be CSS and styles.css. Okay, so we have to create this style.css inside our CSS folder. So I'll create my new CSS file and save it inside the CSS folder. This will be styles.css, and let's target the body and HTML. So this will be margin 0, padding is 0, height height will be 100%, and background color it will be 63 ABC, and this should be tagged as important. Okay, and another for the user card, and also the brand logo container, and another one for the brand logo. Okay, to save us from time, I'll just paste in the rules that applies to this classes, and you can pause the video and copy all the classes that or the rules that I'll be pasting in here. So we have defined the height for our user card as 400, the width will be 350 pixels, margin top auto, margin bottom auto, background will be F39C12, position relative, display flex, justify content center, flex direction column, and so on. So all you have to do is pause the video if you want to copy all these styles applied to this user card class. And for the brand underscore logo container, we have the position as absolute, height will be 170px, and also the width. Top will be negative 75px, border radius 50%, background will be 60 A3BC, and padding will be 10 pixels, text align center, and for our logo will be 150px or pixels, and width as 150 pixels also. Border radius as 50%, and border will be 2 pixels solid and white. So we'll try to save and preview our page, save our style.css, and make sure also to save your login.php and go back to our browser and reload. So I think the CSS rules are working. So in this tutorial, we'll continue working on with this login form, and we will be adding different inputs. So input for our username and input for our password. So let's go ahead and open up our login.php code. So let's pick up where we left off. So this is where we ended last time. We added our own logo for our sign-in form, and let's go ahead add another div for this with the class dflex, and let's add another class which is justify content center. We'll be adding another one which is form container, and we will add also styles for this form container later on. Okay, so inside this div, let's define our form, and of course inside this form let's define all the inputs. So first let's create a div with input group append, and with a span class of input group text. Inside this, we'll be adding an icon which we will be using font awesome. So I, and then with class FAS and then FA user, and right after this div, let's add our input with the type text. Name will be username, and the ID will be, of course, username, and also add class to this, which is form control, then input user, and this will be a required field. And before we forget, let's group this one into another div. So div input group, okay, and close this div here. Add class to this, which is mb3. This is mainly related to Bootstrap. This mb3. This is for the spacing of our division or div. Okay, so we'll just copy the this input group for our password also. So input group, this will be for the password of our user. So the name will be password, the ID password, and also instead of input user, it should be input pass. And let's just change this into 2. And let's add another form group. So div with the class form group. Okay, and then another div. This will hold the remember me button, if you're familiar with that. Custom checkbox. Okay, one sec. Custom checkbox, yes. So inside here, let's type in the input type, which is the checkbox, of course, and for the name, it will be, or let's not add a name to this, but we could, anyway, let's just add the name. So remember me, and the class will be custom control input, and with the ID custom control inline, and let's just add label. So with the class custom control label, and inside here let's just type in remember me. And of course this will be for our custom control inline, which is this input checkbox. So let's now add the button for our sign in. So after this div, which is with the class form container, let's add another one, which is with the class deflex, and let's add another class for this, justify content content center and empty-3, and let's just add class or custom class for this, login container, and Let's add another element, which is the button itself. So with the type button, and with the name will be button, and ID is login. Let's add class to this, which is btn, and then custom class login btn, and the value or the displayed text will be login. Okay, so the next step is to add the sign up button also, or link. You could, this is optional, but for now let's just add this to our form. empty -4 empty -4 plus empty -4, and inside this div let's define another div with class deflex, justify content center, and another custom class which is links. And inside this div, let's just say don't have an account, so class mo2, and the text will be sign up. So as I've said, this is only optional. If you want to implement this sign up, you could put in the link. Say for example, the link will be, for example, registration.php. So you could put the link here, and another div for forget password, the text, and justify content center. Inside this div, let's just define a link to reset the password. So forgot your password, something like that. So now that we have added all the elements to our form, let's try to preview our page and see if it looks good in our browser. So save our file, login.php, and go back to our browser. Navigate to localhost, and of course user login, and the page that we're concerned with is the login.php. So we have here the newly added elements. We have the input, remember me option, and we have the links for sign up and forget password. So as we can see, they're not set yet, or they're not looking good yet. So we need to customize the CSS for our elements. So let's go back to our file. Okay, so one thing that I noticed earlier is they have the same icon, which is the user, font awesome user. So instead of user for our password, let's just type in the key. So let's try that. Save our file and go back to our browser and refresh. So instead of the user icon, this will be the newly added icon, which is the key that signifies our password. Okay, so let's just change this into type password. Instead of text, let's say password. Okay, now let's go to our styles.css. We have defined different or few classes here that we need to target in our CSS to make sure that our login form looks good. Again, you can pause the video and try to copy all the CSS styles that we're going to define here. So number one will be the form container with margin tab 100 px or 100 pixels. The login btn will be with 100%. Background will be C0392B and tag this as important. Color will be white and this will be important. So another one will be login btn focus. Box shadow will be none and tag this as important as well. And the outline will be 0px and important as well. The login container, we have padding 0 to rem and input group text. So background is C0392B. Important color will be white and border will be 0 and this will be important as well. Border radius 0.25 rem 0.25 rem and this will be important as well. And then input user, input pass, this is for our inputs in our login form for username and password. So focus, so box shadow will be none and this will be important as well, and outline will be 0px. And the last one will be custom checkbox with custom input or control input and check, then custom control, then label. Before, this will be background color. Background color will be also the C0392B. Tag this as important as well. So save our style.css and go back to our browser and refresh the page. So as you can see, we now have a nice looking login form. So in the previous tutorial, we have added the elements and also added the styles of this login form. So now let's do the quick fix for this login button, extending way beyond the user and password elements. So let's go back to our login.php code. Okay, so here in our code, I think we have mistyped the class for login container. So instead of dash, let's make it an underscore. So it would reflect, or it will be the same with the login container that we have defined in our styles.css. So go ahead, save your file, login.php, and go back to our browser and refresh. So as you can see, the login button is now aligned with the two elements, or the username and password elements at the top. So let's continue working on with this login form and work with our actual logic to allow the user to log in this particular login form. So before going any further, let's try to move this form or the end form tag. So we would include the login button. So at the end of our code, just before or right before the end body tag, let's add another script to work with our login logic. So inside here, let's define the onload function of the jQuery. Okay, let's try it first if it's working or not. So alert. So save our file login.php and go back to our browser. Refresh the page, and we have the alert that's saying alert. So next, let's try to select our button. So our button has the class login. So if this button is clicked, we will do some logic inside this function. So let's try this first, and let's try to see if this is working or not. So log in that PHP save and go back to our browser, refresh, and let's try to click on this login button. So it's working. Okay, so let's remove this and let's define a new variable here which is valid. Let's just check if the validity of our forms is true. So if the form is valid, let's get the value of our username. Okay, so target our username, which is with the ID username, and get the value. The same thing with our password. So the same with password ID. So the name of this variable will also be password. And let's prevent the submission of this form because we're going to be doing the submission by using the AJAX call to a JS login.php file. So this part right here, let's define the AJAX call. Okay, so the type will be post. Okay, and the URL will be JS login.php, and the data of course will be our username and password. Okay, so username, and then pass in the value username and password and the value password. So if this is successful, let's display alert first success, and if it's not a success, of course, let's define also our display alert. This will be errors, or there were errors while doing the operation. Let's just change this later on. Okay, save our file and go to jslogin.php. Let's just try to echo something here. So hello from jslogin.php. Okay, save jslogin.php and go back to our browser, refresh, and click on this login button. So I think we have an error, so let's try to troubleshoot. So accordingly, type error e prevent default is not a function. Let's try to troubleshoot the problem. So accordingly, e prevent that default is not a function because we missed the t letter there. So save login.php and go back to our browser again, refresh, and click on the login button. So accordingly it was a success. The next step is we're going to work with our config.php to actually connect our code to database or MySQL database. So config that PHP. Let's open the PHP tag here and define few variables so that we could connect to our database. So the user for my case is root. The password is empty, and the database name, as we have defined earlier, is the user accounts. Okay, let us connect to our database with the PDO. So inside here, let's type in MySQL host equals localhost, and our DB name will be equals the DB name, the variable that we have defined at the top, semicolon, and the character set for this will be UTF-8, and of course we need to pass in the user and the password. Yes, and let's just set a single attribute for this video object. Set attribute will be for video attribute, error mode, and of course video colon and error mode will be the return exception whenever there's an error. Okay, so once we have that, we could include this to our JS login.php. So here we could type in require once the config.php, and let's try to use our video object. So select all from users for now, and define a statement. It's the empty select, of course using the video object, prepare, and of course the SQL. So the result will be select and then execute, and let's just pass in an empty array, and if result yes, echo success. Okay, else there were errors while connecting to database. Okay, so semicolon, and let's go back to our login.php. So instead of success, let's alert the data coming from the JS login.php. So login.php, save, and go back to our browser, refresh, and type in something and click on login. So we have an error there. Accordingly, undefined class constant error mode, because we have mistyped this error mode exception. So instead of error mode with all the letters typed in, so let's just make it ERR mode. So save the config.php file and refresh our page, and click on the login button. So hello from JS login.php. So accordingly, it was a success. So in our JS login.php file, instead of success, so let's define a new variable that will hold all the data coming from the database. So fetch, and then video fetch associative array, And then let's just var dump the user variable for now and save the file. Go back to our browser, refresh the page, and type in some values and click on login. So we have the record with the first name Jane and the last name Doe with janedoe@gmail.com as the email. And phone number is there also. Password is Jane Doe, so it's working. Okay, so instead of selecting all users, we need to filter out with the username and password, but we're going to use the email as the username for now, and the password equals limit 1. So username, this will be the values coming from our login form. Post, which is username, and the same with our password. Let's just pass in the password. Okay, password. So instead of passing an empty array, let's pass in the username and the password and define an if statement or stmt select row count is greater than 0, meaning we have a success. We found the user in our database. Else, there's no user for that combo or something. Combo and close our statement. Instead of success, let's just echo a value 1 and we'll check here in our login.php if the value is 1, if the response is with the value 1. So we need to trim the data coming from our JS login.php and let's check if it is equal to 1, and let's redirect our user set timeout window that location that href equals the index with double quote index.php and set the delay for about 2 seconds. Okay, save our login.php and let's go back to our JS login.php. So we have here line number 4, echo hello from JS login.php. We need to remove this. So save JS login.php and go back to our browser. Refresh. So for example, you have janedoe@gmail.com in your database and you just need to type in the password and then click on this login button. So we have the value coming from our JS login.php as number 1. It signifies that we found a user in our database with the combination that we entered in the field username and the password. So okay, and wait for a few seconds. So it redirected to our index.php. But for now, if we try to click on this back button, we could see again the login.php form, which means that we need to set the session so that every time we try to log in with our username and password, if we are authenticated, then we could stay for that particular page, or we could stay in that index.php instead of login.php every time. So in our JS login.php, we need to set the session or start the session. So session and then start. And inside this statement, we need to set our session variable, and let's pass in our index, which will be user login, and then let's uh, pass in the user values, which is the array coming from our database, or the associative array we got from our database. So save this, and inside the login.php we need to check at the top. So let's open up the PHP here and close, and let's check if the session with session user login is set, and add header with location index.php. Save, and let's copy and paste this one, so in our index.php we could also check if the session user login is not set. Redirect to login.php. So we'll just add a element here, welcome to index. Save index.php and go back to your browser, refresh, and type in your username and password. Click on login. So the user is found. Click on OK. So we're not redirected to index.php. That's because we need to add one line to our files. So inside login.php we need also to set the session or start the session, because we're using the session variable below, and make sure to copy and paste this also to index.php, because again we're using the session variable here. So index.php, save, and login.php, save. So refresh our page, we are automatically redirected to our index.php. We won't be able to go to our login.php file because the session is set. So it's checking if the session is set, then stay in index.php. Otherwise, go to login.php. There's one more thing that we need here. We need a link for us to log out in index.php. So let's go back to index.php. So we're just going to add the link here, and this should be index.php and logout equals to true, and type in logout. Okay, save. And here we need to check if the logout variable is set. So if is set get the logout, so we need to destroy the session. So session destroy and unset the session, redirect to our login.php. Okay, save our file index.php, and let's go back to our browser and refresh. So we have here the logout link, so let's click on this. We have successfully logged out from index.php. So we'll try to log in again in index.php by typing in our username and password using our email. So password and then login 1. So we're now at the index.php. Okay, so I think that's all there is to it in this tutorial. Thanks.